What if I told you human evolution isn't over? Not even close. Right now, as you scroll, click, and watch this video, something strange is happening, something bigger than any one of us. While we are still evolving biologically, very slowly, we're also evolving socially, culturally, technologically, and possibly into something entirely new. Throughout Earth's history, life has rewritten itself, both gradually and in massive game-changing leaps. Single cells teaming up to form multicellular organisms, ant colonies acting like one super intelligent body, tiny strands of chemicals becoming self-replicating code. These weren't simple changes. They were revolutions in the way information is stored, shared, and organized. And now, all signs point to another leap, and this one is centered around us. We're becoming more connected than ever, wired together through culture, data, algorithms, and shared consciousness. We're building systems that think faster than we can. We are specializing, cooperating, syncing, just like the cells in your body evolved to do. So what's really going on? This will be a little more speculative than most of my videos, but it's all grounded in what we have already observed in the biological world around us. So let's think about how evolution's next chapter might already be unfolding, and why the future of humanity might not look so human at all. It might get pretty strange. Today, we're going deep. To understand where we're headed, we need to understand how life has changed in the past. I made an entire video looking at these changes, and I'll leave a link to it in the description. I highly recommend going back and watching that before finishing this video, but I'll briefly summarize it here to catch us up just in case. Evolution isn't just a slow, steady climb. It's punctuated by dramatic turning points. Biologists John Maynard Smith and Ernst Southmary called these the major evolutionary transitions, moments when life reorganizes itself at a deeper level. Not just better claws or sharper brains, but a complete rewrite of how life stores information, reproduces, and collaborates. Think of the very first leap, molecules that could copy themselves. Before that, chemistry was just chemistry, but once information could be passed down, albeit imperfectly, evolution was born. These self-replicators in the early origins of life on Earth eventually formed RNA and DNA molecules, which in turn started cooperating and forming unified genes. That's where real complexity started. It wasn't just genetic information that was being replicated into the future, it was coordinated information. Then came cells, bounded structures that kept chemistry contained. Later, some of those cells teamed up, giving rise to multicellular organisms. Suddenly, individual cells weren't out for themselves. They were parts of a greater whole. They specialized. They stopped reproducing independently. They became tissues and organs. And then, animals like us came along, with nervous systems, communication, and eventually language. That opened up the door to complex social life and cultural evolution. Ideas began spreading faster than genes. Knowledge passed from brain to brain, not just DNA to DNA. Traditions, technologies, religions, all part of a new kind of evolutionary system. In each of these transitions, the same pattern emerged. Independent entities come together, share information, specialize, and surrender some autonomy in exchange for higher order functions. Genes formed genomes, cells formed bodies, animals formed societies, minds formed cultures. Each step didn't just add complexity, it transcended the previous level. The whole became greater than the sum of its parts. And here's what's important. A common thread throughout these transitions is a change in how information flows. That's one of the real secrets to evolution's leaps. First it was chemical, then genetic, neural, cultural, and now the flow of information is digital, global, and virtually instantaneous. That's largely why so many scientists and thinkers are starting to ask, are we on the edge of a new major evolutionary transition? Because what's happening right now, the merging of humans with each other, technology, shared media, and synthetic minds, looks a lot like what's happened before, a collection of individual units converging into something bigger, more coordinated, more intelligent. In the past, these leaps took millions or maybe billions of years. This one, it might be happening in our lifetimes. And if that's true, if this really is the next leap, we won't just witness it, we'll be a part of it. If you zoom out far enough, our species starts to look less like a collection of individuals and more like something else entirely, like cells in a brain, neurons firing across a vast planetary nervous system, because that's what we're building. Every text message, every video call, every viral post, every database and search engine. These aren't just tools, they're connections. And together, they've wired humanity into something that behaves less like a crowd and more like a neural network. Think about how brains evolved. Individual neurons, once just specialized cells, began to connect, fire, and synchronize. What mattered wasn't the neurons themselves, but the patterns of communication between them. Once that infrastructure was in place, consciousness, thought emerged. Although I'd be lying if I said we had a good grasp on what consciousness actually is. Now replace neurons with humans. Replace synapses with the internet. Replace neurotransmitters with memes, news, code, and culture. We are externalizing our ideas and cognition. See where this is going? The internet, especially now with AI, smart devices, and real-time data, is acting like a planetary scale nervous system. It senses, it reacts, it stores memory, it even makes decisions. Billions of humans are no longer just living their lives in parallel. They are syncing, adapting, responding to shared information. We may not notice it, but we're becoming part of something more complex. Twitter or X, TikTok, Reddit, and Google aren't just social platforms. They are a collective store of information. Something happens on one side of the world, and within seconds, the entire system knows. Not in weeks or months, like in the old days of newspapers, but instantaneously. And here's the wild part. No single person controls it. Just like no single neuron decides to think. The patterns just emerge from interaction, from scale, speed, and flow. You might say, but we're still individuals, we're not one being. True, for now, but neither were the first neurons. Neither were the first ants. These systems don't start out integrated, they evolve toward integration, toward coordination, toward shared identity. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Structures of shared knowledge, global consensus, cultural memory, and algorithmic behavior shaping what we believe, want, and do are an emergent property, not observable at the level of individuals. It's not always stable, sometimes it's chaotic, but that's expected in any early stage nervous system. Trial and error, synaptic pruning, adaptive wiring. What we're building, whether we mean to or not, is the mind of a higher level being. And if that's true, then we're not just some bystanders in human evolution. We are the neurons. Each of us a firing cell in a mind far greater than our own. Hey, if you're finding this video and where it's headed interesting, and you're curious about human evolution, I want to quickly guide your attention to my newsletter. You can subscribe for free by clicking the link in the description. You'll get updated whenever I post a new video, a brief summary of that video, and other cool evolution and archaeology stuff. So once the video's over, feel free to go sign up. But let's get back into it. A primary reason for the need to communicate and a reliable sign that life is leveling up is division of labor. Think about it. When single cells came together to form multicellular organisms, they didn't all keep doing the same thing. Some became skin, others became neurons, some pumped blood, others fought infections. They gave up their independence to specialize, and in return, contributed to something more powerful, a full body. Now look at human civilization. The deeper you go into modern society, the less self-sufficient any one person becomes. We rely on each other for everything: food, electricity, shelter, safety, knowledge. No single human understands the entire supply chain that delivers a smartphone or a loaf of bread, but for the most part, the systems work. As an evolutionary lineage, humans have always been dependent on their group for survival. One individual human in their natural state is essentially helpless, but a tribe of hunter-gatherers, with the weapons and strategies they have taught each other, quickly become the apex predator. In hunter-gatherer societies, each person plays a role in the group's food acquisition to some degree. But with the shift from hunting-gathering to agriculture and settled societies, came the need to divide labor. Once people could produce food surpluses through farming, not everyone needed to be directly involved. This freed individuals to specialize. Some became toolmakers, builders, weavers, spiritual leaders, or warriors. Over time, these roles became increasingly formalized, giving rise to complex economies, hierarchical structures, and eventually states. Just as cells in a multicellular organism take on distinct functions to serve the whole, early agrarian societies began to organize around functional interdependence, laying the groundwork for larger, more complex civilizations. And this division of labor is now on a global scale, and it's accelerating. We have scientists who spend decades focusing on a single protein, farmers who don't know how to code, and coders who don't know how to grow their own food. We have emergency responders, therapists, drone pilots, climate modelers, and quantum theorists, all dependent on the tools, trust, and knowledge created by others. And this specialization isn't just economic or professional, it's cultural and cognitive. People are starting to think in narrower, more focused ways. We build microcultures. We inhabit information silos. We process data that other people can't, and in return, we rely on others to handle what we can't. Society doesn't just divide labor physically anymore, it's dividing mental labor too. This is always what happens in superorganisms. In ant colonies, no single ant understands the whole, but the colony behaves intelligently. Ants forage, care for eggs, defend the nest, and farm aphids. Not because any one ant is in charge, but because evolution shaped their interactions. We're not ants, but we might be playing the same evolutionary game. In a very real way, humans are becoming cells, and groups of humans with the same specialty are becoming organs. And just like in a body, when the organs function well, the whole organism thrives. If humanity is in the process of becoming a global superorganism, then like any creature, it needs systems to manage life's core functions. Biology teaches us that survival isn't just about having the right parts, it's about how those parts coordinate. Organisms thrive because their organs specialize, communicate, adapt, and regulate themselves. The same logic applies to humanity on a civilizational scale. And as we look at our modern world, we can already begin to see the early prototypes of these biological functions emerging at a societal level. We already touched on the global nervous system, which now enables fast communication and decision making. It includes fiber optic cables, satellites, wireless networks, and much more. The internet connects billions of people, acting like a centralized brain with us as the neurons in its peripheral nervous system. Social media propagates signals at the speed of thought, for better or worse. AI and data analysis tools process inputs and help us make sense of the world. This network keeps us in communication with one another. In addition to the communication of information, the distribution of resources is also a necessity. No organism functions without moving nutrients and energy where they're needed. Our global shipping lanes, logistics systems, and energy grids form the arteries of the superorganism. Economic systems, from banks and credit cards to cryptocurrencies, function like red blood cells, transferring value. These networks allow resources to circulate from producers to consumers, just as glucose travels from the gut to the muscles. When these systems falter, during supply chain breakdowns, for example, we feel the pain immediately, just like a blocked artery. With all of that distribution of resources, waste is inevitably going to pile up. If left unmanaged, this kills. Your digestive tract excretes the obvious bodily waste. Organs like the liver and kidneys manage toxins. Societies mirror this with waste management, recycling, and emerging climate remediation efforts. Even our mental and mimetic spaces require detox. Moderation policies, mental health services, and digital detox initiatives are attempts to purge the superorganism of dysfunction and entropy. Now, this next idea is something I find particularly fascinating, and was the topic of my own master's thesis. It's an extremely dense topic, and one I may want to make an entire video on at some point in the future, so I'll try and condense it here. Parasitic organisms make up a significant portion of the biological world, and they pose one of the biggest selective pressures on all of life. There's a constant competition between these pathogenic microbes and their hosts, a biological arms race. It's an eternal battle. Some even believe that sexual reproduction, a previous major evolutionary transition, evolved to combat parasites. Accordingly, the recombination of genes that results from sexual reproduction introduces more variation into a population. More genetic variation means more opportunities for a species to acquire immunity to and outpace mutating pathogens. So, we have been co-evolving with pathogens since at least the origins of sexual reproduction around 2 billion years ago. They have followed us through our time as hunter-gatherers, into the age of agriculture where they increase in prominence and virality, and remain with us today. As a result, so many of us have succumbed to countless epidemics. For others, our evolved physiological immune systems have proven sufficient to keep us alive. What separates the human pathogen relationship from that of other species is our extensive use of culture to mitigate the selective pressures posed by disease. This process, whereby culture acts as a barrier between humans and disease, can be thought of as a literal cultural immune system, and it is the product of natural selection. Because humans are a hypersocial species, we are not only susceptible to disease from the external environment, but we pass diseases to one another. So, to truly transition into a higher level organism, humanity would have to suppress internal spread, which is the role of this cultural immune system, and it manifests itself in two forms. There is the social psychological half and the material half. We have psychological adaptations that help proactively avoid infection by preventing exposure in the first place, rather than reacting after contact like the physiological immune system does. The emotion of disgust, for example, alerts us to potential contaminants in our environment, and crucially, in other people. It evolved as this sort of frontline defense in our evolutionary arms race with pathogens. At an interpersonal level, humans who feel more vulnerable to disease tend to become less sociable, even rating themselves as less extroverted. When infection risk is high, the costs of social interaction outweigh the benefits. This tendency doesn't just apply to individuals, it scales up culturally. Societies in historically high pathogen regions tend to value conformity, collectivism, and caution, favoring behaviors that preserve group integrity and reduce exposure to outsiders. But this adaptive system has a dark side. The same mechanisms that promote in-group cohesion can fuel xenophobia and the dehumanization of outgroups. People with heightened disease concern show stronger negative reactions to foreigners, or those who seem quote-unquote atypical. This is because foreign groups have evolutionarily been associated with the introduction of diseases to which your group is not yet immune. Just think of the European colonists landing in the Americas. Some research even links high pathogen stress to authoritarianism, as strong centralized control can suppress unfamiliar practices that might pose a health risk at the expense of individual freedoms. In short, the psychological half of the cultural immune system helps protect in-group communities, but also highlights the tension between groups and the ethical challenges of exclusion and control. The material side of the cultural immune system is something we're all a little more familiar with. It's characterized by the physical, tangible side of humanity's defense against disease. Things like tools, technologies, and habits designed to prevent or treat infection. In anthropology, we call these elements material culture, objects people make and use. This adaptive toolkit used to reduce our exposure to pathogens has a long history. The earliest known material innovation was likely cooking with fire, which appeared over 500,000 years ago. Fire cooked the pathogens out of our food, significantly lowering the risk of foodborne illness and reducing the energetic load on our physiological immune systems. Later additions included antimicrobial spices and medicinal plants, which further mitigated foodborne disease. The ensuing cultural evolution of hygiene and medical practices is a story of humanity learning to outwit these invisible enemies that plagued early life. As societies grew more complex, early civilizations developed rudimentary public health systems. Ancient Egyptians used antiseptics in wound care, and the Indus Valley Civilization built sophisticated drainage systems as early as 2600 BC. The Greeks and Romans introduced public baths, aqueducts, and latrines, believing in the importance of cleanliness even if germ theory was still unknown. The leap from intuition to science came gradually. During the Islamic Golden Age and Renaissance, medical knowledge deepened, but it wasn't until the 19th century, with the rise of germ theory by figures like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister, that hygiene truly transformed. Hospitals began sterilizing equipment. Hand washing became standard in medicine and households. In the 20th century, hygiene really entered the private sphere with mass-produced soaps, toothbrushes, and public health campaigns. Vaccines, antibiotics, and sanitation infrastructure formed the backbone of modern disease prevention, making hygiene not just a personal habit, but a cultural revolution. Importantly, we have to acknowledge that other species, which researchers argue have already undergone this superorganism type of transition, have developed their own cultural immune systems. Many eusocial insects living in organism-like colonies express both social and material defenses to pathogenic disease. Many species display socio-behavioral defenses like avoiding fungus-infected areas, avoiding fungus-infected individuals, grooming, and even removing infected individuals from the colony entirely. They even use material defenses such as antimicrobial compounds to improve nest sanitization. It should be noted that one study has linked the hygienic behavior of honeybees to a specific set of genes involved in social immunity. Another suggests that eusocial insects with larger societies rely more on these behavioral mechanisms to avoid disease than on their own physiological immune systems, and that this has led to a relaxation of individual immune responsiveness. Social insects with larger colony sizes showed significantly lower immune responses. Hence, the physiological immune system of many eusocial insects has been suppressed by their species-specific cultural immune system. I put so much emphasis here because to truly transition into a higher organism, suppressing the spread of disease is a prerequisite. Like the spread of cancer within a body, the spread of a truly lethal disease could wipe out an entire population. It has been an existential threat since almost the origins of life, and it remains so. In all, it appears that the systems are forming and the body is taking shape. One question that remains is, how is this happening? Why do major evolutionary transitions like this occur? What is the actual mechanism? To explain this, we can look to multi-level selection. At the core of most major evolutionary transitions is a shift in the level at which natural selection operates. Multi-level selection is the idea that natural selection doesn't act only on individuals, but can operate simultaneously at multiple levels of biological organization. Initially, it acts on lower-level units, individual genes, cells, or organisms, but in certain conditions, it will act on higher-level entities. Those conditions are the increase in cooperation among parts and the decrease in conflict between parts, and probably in that order. Researchers often argue that we should actually define organism not by physical contiguity or genetic uniformity, but by the level of cooperation and suppression of conflict. Just think about your gut microbiome and how you need all those tiny organisms to survive, and they need you. According to this view, a system like human civilization, which increasingly features a division of labor, collective problem solving, and cultural suppression of harmful behaviors, may already qualify as proto-organismal. Though they are young and imperfect, the global systems we've built, such as healthcare, communication networks, and food distribution, are all mechanisms that reduce internal conflict and enhance cooperation, to some degree. Multi-level selection helps explain why such systems evolve. Groups that function more cohesively outcompete those that are divided. David Sloan Wilson and colleagues extend this idea to psychology and behavior, showing that human morality, social norms, and punishment of defectors all act as evolved psychological adaptations that suppress within-group conflict, enabling group-level selection to dominate. In this view, natural selection doesn't act solely on us as individuals. It acts on groups of individuals, and even on groups of groups, like a fractal of evolution. And crucially, the level at which selection is strongest determines what kind of quote-unquote individual evolution favors. This insight is essential to understanding the major evolutionary transitions described in biology. Entities that once competed began to cooperate, and the unit of selection shifted upward. Groups that could suppress selfish behavior and align their parts around shared functions began to behave like new organisms, cohesive, self-regulating, and adaptive. Wilson argues that controlling disruptive self-interest within groups is the precondition for selection to favor cooperation between groups. This is already visible in human history. The evolution of moral systems, religions, legal codes, and social norms all serve to regulate individual behavior in ways that benefit group cohesion. These cultural traits are not just social inventions. They are group-level adaptations, selected over time because they helped human groups outcompete less cooperative rivals. They are sacrifices of individual freedom for the sake of the greater good. According to Wilson, this is cultural multi-level selection in action. So what does this mean for the future? If humanity is now moving toward planetary scale integration with these global communication networks, economic interdependence, and collective threats, then multi-level selection predicts that groups capable of large-scale cooperation will outlast those that can't. But it also predicts something more profound. If selection pressures at the global level become strong enough, and if mechanisms evolve to suppress tribalism, then the entire species may begin to function as a single evolutionary unit. In other words, a human superorganism. But that future is not guaranteed. As Wilson emphasizes, multi-level selection can fail if lower-level conflict overwhelms higher-level unity. The challenge for humanity, then, is not just technological, it's evolutionary. Can we develop global institutions, cultural norms, and systems of value that align billions of people toward collective fitness? And the even bigger, more profound question is, would it all be worth it? Why would we want to make this transition at all? For humanity to complete this transition, we would need to institutionalize mutual dependence, expand cultural mechanisms that suppress parasitism and divisiveness, and continue to scale up our communication and coordination to a planetary level. We would need systems, both technological and ethical, that treat all of humanity as a single adaptive unit. This would make individuals functionally analogous to specialized cells within a body, distinct, interdependent, and aligned with a higher collective goal. Yet, every major evolutionary leap comes with a choice, a fork in the road. Will the parts work together to form something greater, or will conflict continue to suppress unity? It seems unlikely that the choice was made consciously in the past, but this time is different. We are conscious agents, with at least the illusion of free will. That's the tension that humanity faces right now. As we become more interconnected, we're being pulled toward integration, but we're also feeling the strain: political polarization, culture wars, nationalist movements, algorithm-driven echo chambers, rising inequality, mistrust, etc. The list goes on. We're trying to become a superorganism while still behaving like rival tribes. Historically, the major evolutionary transitions that succeeded were the ones that found stable cooperation. Genes that stopped cheating and started aligning their reproduction formed genomes. Cells that quit attacking each other formed multicellular bodies. Organisms that sacrifice one-for-one genetic inheritance for the advantage of sexual reproduction and genetic variability. In each case, natural selection favored those who could build trust and reduce conflict. But that trust came at a cost: the loss of autonomy. That's what makes this stage so volatile. To scale up, we have to give up certain freedoms, to coordination, to systems, to shared rules, but also maybe to a tyrant. We don't know, and the unknown scares us. Nuclear weapons are a perfect example. No single nation can guarantee safety from their use, and yet the actions of any one state can threaten the survival of all. The destructive potential is global, but the decision-making power remains local, concentrated in the hands of a few leaders. Preventing nuclear catastrophe requires intense coordination, mutual trust, verification systems, and long-term thinking, all of which run counter to our tribal instincts and short-term political cycles. The same is true for AI safety, ecological collapse, and the destabilization of digital ecosystems. These aren't isolated problems. They are planetary vulnerabilities that demand planetary-scale cooperation. However, the choice to solve problems like these through an evolutionary transition isn't as obviously good as it may sound. Aside from losing individual freedom, there are other risks too. As human societies become more interdependent, disruptions in any one area can cascade across the entire system. Just as a single malfunctioning organ can endanger a whole body, failures in energy, communication, or financial systems can ripple globally, leading to synchronized collapse rather than isolated breakdowns. Interconnectivity increases efficiency, but it also concentrates vulnerability. Another major risk is informational capture. In a superorganism, the flow of information becomes central. It functions like neural signaling in a brain. But who controls this information? If powerful actors, like unjust corporations, governments, or AI systems, monopolize data or manipulate perception, the entire system could become biased, misaligned, or self-destructive. A superorganism shaped by misguided information or opaque algorithms may act decisively, but irrationally, pursuing goals that serve a small subset while undermining the whole. Similarly, there's the risk of value lock-in, a phenomenon where early dominant values, ideologies, or technologies become so embedded that they resist change, even when they become maladaptive. If the emerging superorganism hard codes narrow or harmful values into its system early, whether through laws, machine learning biases, or institutional inertia, future generations may inherit a structure they cannot easily reform, even as conditions change. Finally, and maybe the most profound risk, is that it's irreversible. In past evolutionary transitions, from prokaryotes to eukaryotes, or from solitary cells to multicellular organisms, there's virtually no evidence of successful reversion. Once individual units become fully integrated into a larger whole, they lose the capacity to function independently. A skin cell cannot jump off and become an autonomous organism if it doesn't like the body it's in. A worker ant cannot leave the colony and found a new lineage. The transition closes off evolutionary exits. If humanity completes such a transition, we may cross a point of no return. Our cognition, our behavior, even our desires could become so enmeshed in collective systems that disentangling would be impossible. If the global superorganism fails or becomes misaligned, we probably won't be able to reboot as individuals or sovereign societies. The previous structure of autonomy, adaptability, and experimentation may be lost in the name of unity. This isn't merely theoretical. We already rely on interlocking systems of food production, communication, and governance that no single individual or community can replicate independently. The deeper we integrate biologically with neural tech, culturally with global norms, economically with interdependence, the more we risk becoming locked into a trajectory we no longer control. One where the organism lives on, but the human experience changes in ways we can't yet conceive and won't be able to reverse. That's why this transition demands more than momentum. It demands reflection. Because if we are building something greater than ourselves, we must ensure it's worth becoming a part of. But if we find a way to bridge the divide, to align on goals bigger than our tribes, to build shared narratives and institutions strong enough to hold the weight of the future, then this could be the most important transition in the history of life on Earth. Because this time, we will be choosing what kind of being we become. To go back and watch the first part of this video, looking more into the past, watch the video on the screen. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the algorithm gods, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious.